My watch says it's 6 o'clock, so I will call the February 24th, 2022 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Debbie Moore.
Here.
Cynthia Meyer.
Here.
Cheryl Lee.
Present.
Ishmael Harris.
Here.
Pablo Cerna. Carrie Kaler.
Here.
Scott Long. And Greg Sherry and Matt Lassen will not be with us tonight.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is citizen comments. Do you have anyone signed up
Not
for
at this
citizen
time.
comments? All righty, then we'll skip on down to item 3, items for individual consideration. Item 3A, consider action to approve meeting minutes from January 27, 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to read them? Are there any additions or corrections or deletions? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
I'll motion to approve. Second.
Motion and a second to approve. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let the record show that it was passed unanimously. Item 3B, consider action to approve the Colony Mud 1C Section 8 preliminary plat being 19.546 acres out of the Jose Manuel Bangs Survey, abstract number 5, located north of Sam Houston Drive within the extraterritorial jurisdiction of Bastrop, Texas, as shown in Exhibit A. Ms. Allison.
Good evening, everyone. All right, so Colony Mud 1C Section 8. This is in the southern arm of the colony moving westward. It will be just north of Sam Houston Drive and takes access off of Rainwater Creek with a loop off of that road. There are 31 residential lots and 4 open space lots and is just under 20 acres. All right, and here's a picture. So you can see Sam Houston, here we go, extends to the south. You have a utility lot with one of their ground storage tanks for water, one of your large drainage lots here, and then the small loop of houses. And staff recommends approval.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion and a second to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let the record show that it passed unanimously. Item 3C, consider action to approve the Colony Mud 1F, Section 2, preliminary plat being 32.249 acres out of the Jose Manuel Bangs Survey, abstract number 5, located south of 8 Oaks Drive and west of Republic Drive within the extraterritorial jurisdiction of Bastrop, Texas, as shown in Exhibit A. Ms. Allison.
All right, so 1F2, this is in the northern arm of the colony. 8 Oaks extends into the existing portion of the colony as that main arterial in the northern arm, much like Sam Houston in the southern arm. And then Republic Drive will be the main road that connects the northern arm to the southern arm. And so this is just west of that. It is just over 32 acres and will be 80 residential lots with 6 open space lots, and will extend 8 Oaks Drive and Republic Drive to the south. All right, and so here's the picture. As you can see, we extend 8 Oaks here, and then Republic Drive will connect into the southern arm and have a small entryway park here, and it also connects into 1F1, which is the next section over as well. And staff recommends approval.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any questions? Yes, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve.
Do I have a motion and a second to approve? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Let the record show it passed unanimously. Thank you, ma'am. Item 3D, consider action on a neighborhood regulating plan on 3.973 acres of Bastron Tract A11, located at 2801 East Loop 150 within the city of Bastrop, Texas, as attached in Exhibit A as the Hill Food Truck Park and Glamping Community Neighborhood Regulating Plan. Ms. Bills.
Good evening. So tonight what we have before you is the request for a neighborhood regulating plan. So this process was something that was new with the B3 code and is required anytime a tract or redevelopment area is over 3.4 acres in size. So this is about 3.9 acres in size. And that's so we can make sure we're addressing connectivity and looking at the layout in conjunction with the surrounding area to cohesively plan for the area. Neighborhood regulating plans can be approved administratively. However, when there's some significant deviations or changes from the required code that staff can't provide in a warrant, we will do have the option of forwarding those to the P&Z for consideration and approval. So this slide shows you the layout of, so this is kind of a conceptual site plan, so there will be additional phases and actual site plans that we'll have to do to get the more details of where the utilities are going to be and in the phasing of when this development builds out. But this is the general layout that the applicant is requesting. So right now on the site, there's an existing building that's been there for a long time. I think the name is Rattlesnake Inn. Was in the past. It's hasn't been used in a while, but it was some improvements to the exterior were made about a year ago. And then the rest of the site, these would all be new improvements that you're seeing. So along the front, they're proposing to do a food truck court, and that would put the parking behind, and then do in a different phase, do a kind of this would be the glamping community, so that would have a mix of RVs and cabins that would be on the site, and then another shop, some other kind of commercial building to serve the site. So you can see there's different phase lines. So the idea is that the applicant would be able to build this out in phases over time as they have the funds to do so or have the needs for those different elements. And it may change slightly from this, but this is the general idea of what they're looking to do. Some of the deviations that they're requesting. So with 3.4 acres, you're usually looking at a couple different roads to meet our 330 block grid requirement. This is proposing just one road that would come through. There is some city right-of-way to the south of this that connects back out to Arena Drive. So the city would be able then to pick up that road and make that connection back to Arena Drive. So we'd have some additional cross-connectivity from Chestnut Street back to Arena Drive that people would be able to drive and walk through. And one of the exhibits that I showed to show kind of the layout in this area to show how it currently doesn't meet our connectivity, and this is achieving the goals of making it better. When we talk about a block, we're talking about a complete block that you could actually walk from one street to the next all the way around. In this area, the purple are the actual constructed streets in this area, so you'll see there's a lot of unopened right-of-ways in this area that have not been built. With the toad habitat, some of those could be challenging, but there just hasn't been development that's moved that direction yet. People look at it. I will say that the rules from Fish and Wildlife are not impossible, but they do have additional steps that have to be taken for development. So the existing block is really from Chestnut Street down 95 to 71, back up Arena Drive, and connecting back to Chestnut. So that's what would make a complete block if you wanted to walk around this entire area. So with this application, it would actually be creating another block that would be a little over, I think it was 2,000 square foot perimeter. So when you're thinking of our building block code, a 720 block grid is 2,880. So it's between our 330 block grid and our 720 block grid. And given some of the built conditions and topography changes in this area, staff feels that that's starting to get to the intent of our code of creating a complete street network in this area. But some of the other deviations from the code, well, the background of this is they're proposing to extend that one public street from Chestnut Loop 150 to connect to Arena Drive. They show the layout of all this, and it's anticipated to be built in phases. The significant deviations is the public frontage plan. So one of the things we look at fairly closely is that interaction of the street to the property. That requires a public sidewalk, street trees, and then pulling the buildings up closer to the road. In this case, with impervious cover limitations of the toad habitat, we recognize it's hard to put a lot of buildings right at the street edge. So that's one thing that staff would recommend approval of. But we do recommend still putting the sidewalks along Chestnut Street and the new road to promote connectivity. There are no sidewalks in that area yet, but that's one of those that as this develops, each site will have to bring that in, and then we'll get to a point where then the city will be able to address additional sidewalks through the city CIP program or a grant request that would complete that network. But that's kind of the thing with sidewalks. Someone has to start somewhere with them, or we'll just never get any sidewalks in an area. One of the other things, parking in the second layer, and where we're referring to that is up in this corner. We require the parking to be mostly, we call it behind the building. It can't stick out. Remember, we have layers. The first layer is everything from the street to the front of the building, and then 20 feet back from the front of the building is the second layer, and then after that is where all the parking can be. So it's to kind of pull the parking back from being in front of the main properties. And other than that, one little area, the site largely complies with that request. And then the 80% lot occupation with the buildings, and then exceeding the block length and block perimeter requirements. So with that, what staff recommends is to approve this plan with the condition that street trees and sidewalks along Chestnut and that new road are provided, that parking in that corner is moved into the third layer. That as we look at the site plan that we extend, our code does require it. It's called a cross-access connectivity between properties, especially ones that front onto TxDOT roads, because there's limited points where you can have driveways on TxDOT roads. So this gives some ability for people to move between parking lots without having to get back out on the street. And that's something we'd look at during the site plan phase. And then one of the things that we're looking at is trying to vary the development process. So the next phase typically in this would to go to a plat. You'd have to plat this property. Through some intricacies of the toad habitat, the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan, to be able to use the county permitting level of authority, you can't plat. If you plat the property, it invalidates it from the program, and you would have to go straight to Fish and Wildlife for all of your permits. So as long as the applicant's willing to follow the toad habitat rules, I think we can work out a way to achieve the goals of getting the street dedicated and the easements necessary for the utilities without platting. But if the intention is not to meet the toad habitat, then there's no reason you couldn't meet the platting requirements. So,
And why are there platting requirements having to do with the toad?
So the intent of the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan is not to further fragment property. So under their regulations, you can develop any lot, an existing lot that's over an acre, up to, I think, or over 2 acres, up to an acre of impervious cover. Don't quote me on all this. There's several different levels of categories you can fall under the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan. But so if you have a lot, so in this case it's 3.9 acres, they can disturb and pave up to an acre of it under the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan, and the county's administrator can give a permit for that. If they want to do more than that, or they want to further subdivide it into smaller lots, they have to go straight to the federal government and get a permit from the Fish and Wildlife, Department of Fish and Wildlife. So does that kind of answer the question? It's a rule that's specifically stated that, and they use the word plat. You cannot plat the property. If you plat it, it invalidates it from being able to get a permit through the county.
And that's not our rule.
That's not our rule. That's a federal rule, essentially. So staff would be willing to do that as long as the property is meeting those guidelines, either of Fish and Wildlife or the county Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan of working through that process. Past that, we will still have drainage plans and site development plans and building permits that'll have to be in some extension of public utilities. And usually that's why we have to plat, is to make sure we get the extension of the public utilities. It's a much simpler process through the platting process to establish all the easements consistently and to get all the utilities extended in an orderly manner through the platting process. But otherwise, staff recommends approval with those four conditions. It's a lot of information. It was all over the place, so I'm sure you have some questions.
I've got one little question, which is, are you not concerned with where this green road is called out, that it will be a cut through? Is that, I mean, obviously the point is for connectivity, but you've kind of got a major street. Is there not concern about them cutting across this property to get?
Oh, through the, I honestly don't think that will be an issue because so right as Loop 150 is curving, it's really Chestnut curving into Loop 150, that's already a dedicated turn. So it would actually take more effort to turn into here and cut through.
Okay.
Unless there's a backup, but
Okay.
you're gonna get yourself to the exact same spot you would have otherwise.
Okay.
And the design of this road should be such that it'll encourage slower speeds, which would not be as inviting to cut through.
Excuse me. So who is it going to be their responsibility to provide the sidewalks?
Yes,
Okay. So how much footage would they have to provide?
it would be along the, I can't, pushing the wrong button. Along, and again, they can build this in phases with the site plan, but it'd be along the frontage of a Chestnut, and then down at least one side of the new road.
So the frontage, like from there to.
From along, to everything that borders their property
Okay.
line. So their
Okay.
property
So
starts
just out in
here.
front of the property.
Just in front of their property,
Okay.
yes. Not extending further than that. And when the site to the west develops, and we know who owns it, and we've talked to them before about it, when they develop, then they have requirements for sidewalks.
And so that was going to be my next question. Like, what is do you know of whatever future planning is going to happen, development, as far as if it's going to be any more housing or?
The last plans for this lot was for a restaurant.
Okay.
And that, to our knowledge, that hasn't changed. It's just the property
And
owners
they're
haven't
going
moved
through
forward.
whatever they need to get that, or?
They've been working on it for years. It's, again, there's challenges in this area because not only do you have the toad habitat, but you also have a TxDOT right-of-way. So those are all different considerations you have to do for traffic impact.
Right.
And then also getting permits from either Fish and Wildlife or the county.
Okay, thank you.
And you did say that the sidewalks could be built in phases?
Yeah, so contiguous with, so if the first phase is just to do this little corner up here, then they just need to build that part of the sidewalk with that. And then as they built out the rest, we could phase that.
Okay.
Can we talk about the relocation of that little piece of parking? Why does the applicant want it there as opposed to complying with?
And we've actually had a discussion about that, and this was just kind of a sketched out, and that can move,
Okay.
so.
Okay.
And again, like I said, this is conceptual, so there's still a lot more detail. You know, we don't show where the utilities are. They're over yonder, so they're gonna have to be brought across to get access, to bring them to the food court, you know, to bring them to the future camping area.
My question is on the sidewalk issue again. And I understand the codes, what it says, but if you put a sidewalk all the way down and you go to Chestnut, if I remember correctly, TxDOT wouldn't allow, when there was sidewalk years ago, was tried to plan up the hill. And the problem was with TxDOT, and they weren't going to allow. So if we put a sidewalk, even pertaining to the codes, are you just going around the perimeter of the, like Chestnut and up Loop 150?
Yeah, it'll be in the TxDOT right-of-way. current TxDOT rules do actually require sidewalks along their projects, and they do allow sidewalk in the right-of-way. And we have a memorandum of understanding with TxDOT that will maintain those sidewalks that go in TxDOT's right-of-way. Trees and sidewalks, we've had that discussion with them on that. So the sidewalk would actually go like right outside the property line in the Loop 150 Chestnut right-of-way.
What kind of trees would be required?
So we require shade trees as street trees, and we have a preferred plant list in the technical manual, and they are your typical native Texan trees, your live oaks, bur oaks, loblolly pines, pecan trees. There's a list of, I believe, 13 different trees that we allow.
And so many trees per acre, per linear foot?
It's usually, so our street cross-section calls for one every 30 feet, but we can adjust that spacing when we do the site plan. To me, that makes sense for the topography and for the type of road we're up against. And sometimes if there's overhead electrical lines, sometimes we may put in a smaller tree to not interfere with the electrical lines.
On the tree question, that route where the sidewalk and the trees, I mean, that's all trees right now, so will they be able to consider the trees that
Yes.
exist?
Yeah, if there's existing trees there, those would count as their street trees, yeah. The goal is in general to have trees along the walking path that provide some shade for the sidewalk, and there's different ways to get there, and we can get there during the site development plan.
And the applicant is here?
Yes, the applicant is here if you have questions.
Do you have any questions for Ms. Jones? I would like to address. Please come forward. And give us your name and address, please, ma'am?
Yeah.
For the record.
Pardon?
For the record, not that we
Okay.
don't know you.
So my name is Deborah Jones, and I live at 1606 Pecan Street. So we have been working together with the city for several years on this plan, and I think we've come up with a pretty good plan. So I'm in agreement with just about everything that Jennifer's asked us to do, but there's a couple of things that I think that are a bit overreaching. So we were talking about the sidewalks, and TxDOT does have some sort of requirement, yet to the east of me, which is where they did all that landscape, if you're familiar with where Loop 150 curves around there, and there's a massive, no sidewalks were put in that. There was over $1 million spent on that project, and there were no sidewalks. So that's a little frustrating for me because I don't know what I'm connecting to. I mean, and I asked about that, and it was like, well, it's different for them. So does that mean they don't have to put sidewalks in? You know, I question that. So Trey and I talked about that a little bit, and we talked about that at the meeting. And what we were thinking about doing is perhaps the city would step in and do something there. And I don't know, Jennifer, we were just brainstorming. But they might do some sort of path that would connect to the front of the property just beyond the driveway. So I don't have a pointer or anything. So there would be a very limited walking space from basically, if you were at the food court, you could walk over just to the east of the driveway, and where that little building is, which was the old Ritter's, the Rodeo Inn burned down, but that was the old Ritter's, and you could actually walk across the front of the property there, and then right where all that landscape starts, then there would be a sidewalk that would actually go to where you could go to the state park and cross the street or go over to that treaty oak, or it actually could go somewhere, but we would have to cooperate with whoever does that. I don't know if it would be TxDOT, I don't know if it would be the state, I don't know if it would be the city, but it wasn't done. So I would like to, and then the other thing I would like to say is that because that is the toad habitat, I would think that we should look at an alternative surface, something also that would fit up there. There's a lot of old buildings, rusty buildings, and maybe do some crushed granite sidewalks, not these beautiful, perfect, modern concrete sidewalks. So my proposal for the sidewalk is that, yes, we would do something, it would fit in with the landscape, and I just want to pass this down, this elevation, and y'all could kind of look it a little bit. That's the elevation. And you can kind of see where I'm talking about, just beyond the side, the driveway. We would have a pipe fence along the front of the property. We would, and I've worked with Carrie Croft at the county, and she's going to be coordinating and working with us on the landscape, and we're going to sort of create we're going to emulate kind of what the state did, nothing that extensive, of course, but it's going to be scattered along that pipe fence, which is going to be rusty. It's going to fit in. And then what we would like to do is the crushed granite sidewalk that would go across the front inside the fence, perhaps, because I think it's a little bit intimidating to have a sidewalk there where there's no, I mean, it's very dangerous. And those of you who've lived here long enough who did one day ride your bike to the state park, you never did it again because it was absolutely terrifying, or walked up there. So I would think it would be the best to have a sidewalk within the perimeter of that fence, coordinate with whoever on the other side, and we could connect to the state park. And I'm agreeable to that. And then I think what we could do is connect some sort of attachment to the property that a sidewalk would be completed in the future as it connects to something beyond that. So for us to spend our money to connect nowhere and to go down there, I just would rather see that, like Jennifer said, it be done in phases. And so that's one thing I wanted to address. And the other thing is that we've worked with the county and Fish and Wildlife. We've had meetings, extensive meetings. I've had probably 4 meetings with Carrie Croft. And we're not required to pay $3,000 for this permit. We don't even get close to the coverage requirements that we are held to for this property because there's such limited development that we're proposing. And as far as the road, because the road is required by the city came up with this. They said they wanted us to put that road in for connectivity. That road actually doesn't even count towards our coverage requirements because it's required by the city for that connectivity that they want to do. So that's not even part of our deal. And if you look at what we're putting in there, basically 3 or 4 food trucks in the front, wherever those wheels touch, and then same thing with the parking would be pervious cover, like maybe a crushed granite, something that would kind of fit that style up there, that look, and so forth. So I have a problem with I just want to be able to graduate the sidewalk, look at something that goes with what we've talked about up in that part of town, which is a pervious cover, which would be maybe a crushed granite type look. And then also not connecting the fact that I would have to, I just don't understand, with all due respect, why the city is asking me to pay $3,000 to Fish and Wildlife in the county when they both specifically told me I don't have to do that. I'm well under their coverage requirements, and I'm working with them just as much, maybe not quite as much as I am with the city, but they're actually going to be working with me on the fencing and the landscape and the sidewalk as far as because of the toad, so that we just get the right look. And further, I just wanted to say that the city and the county and Fish and Wildlife is very happy with this plan. There was really that property, just the way it was, as far as how you could use it, was so limited, and this so works with the environment and with the restrictions that it's been, not all the time, but there have been times it has been really fun working as a group on this project, because it's really been a group effort moving forward, because it doesn't fit into anything. And there's so many groups and entities that I'm having to work with. And then the other thing on that plan, if you've been up there, there's actually 2 driveways that come onto that property. And we volunteer to relinquish one of those driveways, that first driveway. It feels like it's a little bit quick to exit off that exit ramp. The second driveway, it's not. We've had no issues. It doesn't feel unsafe. It doesn't feel quick. So we feel like by just letting that go, that we really, I think it really has solved, I don't know, problems, but concerns. And so, like I said, we've been pretty flexible all the way up, and listening to what TxDOT, the county, the city, Fish and Wildlife, you know, federal, county, state, and city are all the entities that we're having to work with on that. So my request is to be able to graduate that sidewalk and work with the city with getting whoever is to the east of us to do their part. I think if I'm being asked to do a sidewalk, they should have a sidewalk too, because we could connect to the park. Attach some sort of a graduated plan to the property that would connect to sidewalks as they come in to the west. And then also to take away the condition of asking, because in here it says to comply with Fish and Wildlife in the county, which I am, and in parentheses, by a permit. I don't know why the city's at, I don't think the city, let me say this, I don't think the city should be asking me to do that if Fish and Wildlife and County say that I don't need
Will they
to.
give you a permit? Will they give you a statement in writing so
They
that you
have.
that?
Carrie wrote a letter, and I signed a declaration of declination, I believe, and all of that's documented. And in the future, in the future, when we engineer the upper level, because the property's kind of in two levels, as we engineer the upper level, which that has to be done to do an RV park up there, and that's in the future, if we will be involved with the county, and if we want to later pull a permit because we maybe have more sites than we thought we were going to have, or I don't know, we'll do that. But for what we're doing right now, no, it's not like the door is closed on that, but for what we're doing right now, absolutely it's not an issue. And as far as the platting is concerned, it's illegal for us to plat. The city has a platting requirement if you put in a road. Carrie wrote a letter about that, Carrie Croft, who works with the toad habitat of the county. And I worked with her and with Trey, and there is an opportunity for the city to issue something called a directive in place of platting, and it accomplishes, it's a piece of paper, just like the plat. It accomplishes the same thing. It allows us to put that road through without platting, and it's agreeable to the county, it's agreeable to Fish and Wildlife, and it's agreeable to the city. So that's a non-issue. That's already been solved.
Well, obviously it hasn't, because there's still some requirements at the city. Are you familiar with what she's talking about?
So there's kind of three options with the toad habitat to do development in the toad habitat. The first is to go to the county through their Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan and follow the rules that Fish and Wildlife let them develop in that plan, and that can go through the county level, doesn't have to go to the federal government. The second step is if it's going to be something beyond the level that can be approved at the county, in the county's plan, it goes to Fish and Wildlife, and they can issue that permit. The third option is you can sign a declaration of basically applying with either one of those two things, and basically it says you're taking your risk that you're not following either sets of rules, and the Fish and Wildlife may come back and cite you for not following the rules later. So those are the three. So the third one really isn't following either of those rules. It's saying you're not going to get a permit from either one of them, and you're taking your chances. So those are the three options. So the city's perspective is we obviously want you to either comply with the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan or the Fish and Wildlife. And those are the processes that we're looking for that permission from one of those two programs.
So
And hang on, wait, Ms. Jones, you said you've got that documentation from?
May I please?
Yeah.
Okay, so that wasn't really your question. Okay, that was the answer to a different question. Your question was
No.
specific, wait, hold on a second. Your question was
what my
about,
question
no, wait,
was.
but I'm so sorry, I've been doing this for almost 4 years. Your question was specifically about platting. You said that wasn't solved. and you didn't address that. And the platting is basically a word in a book that the city has just for the B3 plan.
Would you address that? No.
So plating is a process that's been required under our code, even prior to the B3 code, that to extend utilities and to establish new roads, you need to do it through a subdivision plat. There are ways to kind of accomplish the same things, but they're actually much more complicated. We do have some limited platting exemptions in our code, but in order to get this street and to get all the easements in, it's gonna require a number of what we call separate instruments. So the surveyor's gonna have to go in and survey the road. They're gonna have to go in, they're gonna have to survey the easements. Each easement's gonna have to have a separate document. So at the end, we may have 5 different documents that we're gonna have to take to the county and get recorded that are gonna have to get pulled up in title searches separately versus one plat that shows all that information. So that's why we prefer to do it in a plat. It's actually much more work to do it outside of a plat. The only reason we would contemplate even going that route is so that the site can comply with the Fish and Wildlife or the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan regulations. Does that kind of make sense? So if they go to the Fish and Wildlife, my understanding from Carrie is that this can qualify for a permit under her code. The way that she's seen it drawn out so far, that it's not tripping the amount of impervious cover that would trip the toad habitat rules. But the minute we plat it, because the Lost Pines Conservation Plan is very specific, it says, once you have a new plat on the property, then she can't issue a permit anymore. And then it has to go straight to Fish and Wildlife. It's the Fish and Wildlife and the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan. It was adopted, I think, about 15 years ago. The toad habitat's been around much longer than that. It's been under different sets of rules in those many decades. I will say probably what was developed 15, 20 years ago is not the most clear. And so we're working within the confines of what is the letter of what it explains in the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan. So, and that's in the B3 code does have language that talks about geographic sensitivity to the built environment and to geographically sensitive regions of town, which this part of town qualifies for that. So that's why this is a very limited situation in which we would consider not doing a formal plat. However, if someone wants to come in and say, well, we're gonna pave over all 3 acres, we're not gonna follow the Fish and Wildlife rules, and there's no reason why they can't plat it, because that's just another rule of the program they're not following. So, does that make sense?
I have 2 members here that have questions. I have 2 commissioners that asked questions. I think you had a question.
So, just a thought here, even a question. So, if they're adhering to what they need to, right, and Fish and Wildlife do their investigation and say they're all to the clear, to me, I would think that their property would kind of be on their radar, not in like a bad way, but, you know, hey, we're going to keep an eye because we've issued this permit and we need to make sure that they're adhering to everything. And my thoughts are, if they're not, then if nothing else, Fish and Wildlife would be able to shut them down with that.
Fish and Wildlife usually just cite and fine is their process. And that has happened on the site adjacent to this, so.
Okay.
Where all they did was plat, and they did get fined, so. So if you decline to follow the rules, Fish and Wildlife is made aware of it, and they do have the option to come out and investigate.
Okay. Because it kind of sounds like that's what she's doing, is putting herself out there so that if, you know, they ever need to come check it out, that they can. Is what it sounds like to me, so.
Yes, but our rules state that the only reason we're willing to waive our rules is because of one of these other rules.
Right,
So-
I understand
Yeah,
that.
okay, yeah.
I understand.
So for me, as far as the platting goes, that's 6 and 1/2 dozen the other. You either record it on the plat or you record it by separate instrument. It's more of a pain, but it's still legal recordation. So that, to me, is a non-issue. If they need to not plat to meet those requirements and you record it separately, big deal. What I don't understand is getting back to the 3, pulling the permit 2 different ways or acknowledging you're not going to do it and taking the risk. what is staff's, I guess I'm not understanding the connection as far as binding them to pulling the permit if you're saying there's a third option. And I'm agnostic. I'm just curious as to what that means.
Yeah, so in our code, we specifically, part of our plating process that we look at for everything is that you have a permit from TxDOT. So we're gonna check to make sure your driveway is legal with TxDOT, that you have a permit from Fish and Wildlife, that you're following their regulations, or the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan, and then we'll move forward. So we're gonna look for one of those two things. And if you don't have either the Lost Pines or the Fish and Wildlife, and you're not going to follow those rules, then there's no restriction against platting, is where we're going. So the restriction for platting comes from the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan, and if you're not gonna follow the plan, then there's no restriction from platting. The letter from Carrie states
I see.
that once you plat, she cannot issue you a permit anymore.
I see.
So that's why we're willing to waive, or not waive, but to find another
Okay.
alternative process to platting, is so she can still continue to follow the Lost Pines
Okay.
Habitat Conservation Plan.
Okay, so that's the trade-off.
Yes.
You either don't have to plat and we go through the pain of filing 5 separate instruments, or you plat and you can't pull your permit through them, which
You can't pull it
which
through the
opens-
county, you would either have to go
which
to the feds or
federal-
run the risk of
or
getting
run the
cited.
risk. Gotcha,
If I could-
okay.
If I could address that, if I could, please. Which is not why I'm doing that, because these are two separate things. You know, the road is being required by the city. It's illegal for me to plat. Trey said it's not a big deal. We do the directive. Of course, it's going to cost me more money. It's going to be more work. It's going to take more time. But that's the rule, okay? And I'm happy to do that. By not going with the third option and declining it's not that I'm saying I'm not going to follow the rules. And my surveyor and Carrie both talked to me about this. It's that I think most developers, they're going to come in there and really push the limits on how much they can develop. Like if you've talked to most people up in that area, they want to put in an office building and they want to have a parking lot, and it's just like, how can I cover as much land as possible? That's when that permit comes into play, and they're saying, they're agreeing with you that that's what you're going to do, and they're not going to fine you if that goes south, or if if there's a problem with it. For me, I'm not even close to coverage requirements.
Sure, but what Ms. Bills is saying is you can take that risk and you just have to plat and meet our other requirements.
Well, again, those are two separate issues. I still can't plat because in the future, we may at some point pull a permit if we decide that what we're going to do up top is going to have more coverage. That's not our plan, but either way we go, we have to get a directive. That's part of like the people to the west of me. I mean, I think they've been in this process for 7 years. And that was the mistake they made, was platting, and it sent everything back to zero, and they had to start over with their site plan, and they got fined. I'm not going to do that.
So what's the issue with paying the $3,000 and pulling the permit? Is it just the money, or is it?
Well, I don't need
beyond?
one, so if you, okay.
That's
I
kind of
think-
what my question is. Let me follow up on you, Carrie, which is going to tie right in, and I'm asking everybody on this. We're not going to plat. That way you can get the permit, Fish and Wildlife. You're going to get the permit from Fish and Wildlife. Why do you have to pay $3,000 to get a permit from the city? That's my question. I don't quite understand, since you're following the process to get the permit from Fish and Wildlife. I don't understand why she does have to pay $3,000. Yeah, that's kind of my question.
There's two options. The $3,000 plan that goes through the county, the permitting process that goes through the county through Carrie. Or there's the permitting process that goes through Fish and Wildlife, which that's a totally different permitting process. I don't know what that costs. It's much more expensive to go straight to the federal government. Those are the kind of permits that Buc-ee's went straight to Fish and Wildlife. Those bigger developers, when they want, and anyone can go to Fish and Wildlife to get a permit. I think it sounds scarier than it is. It does take a little longer. Through the county's plan, she can issue those permits in probably a month or so. It's a several-month study that you have to do, and a lot more environmental assessment with Fish and Wildlife. So it's $3,000 through the Lost Pines, or it's whatever the fee is through Fish and Wildlife and through there. So it's two separate permitting processes. You have to either go through, Carrie's allowed to issue a permit for like 3 different things. You can do conservation subdivision, which is how Cola Vista was constructed. You can do an incidental take for lots that are already there, or you can do minimal disruption that you can do no more than an acre. And those are the 3 things that Carrie can permit. If you go outside of that and you're being legal, you go to Fish and Wildlife. If you don't want to do either one of those things, you just want to take your chances and pull permits and build through the city and build what you want, then you run the risk of Fish and Wildlife coming and finding you. So does that kind of make sense? There's the 3 different kind of things going on there.
I have a commissioner who's had her light on for a while, so.
Thank you. So, I have a couple of questions. So, what's the place type for that piece of property?
What's the what?
Is there a place type for that piece of property?
Yes, it's P5.
It is
Place
considered
type
a P5?
5, yeah.
Okay, so, to me, it sounds like we're trying, what I'm hearing is you can do this or you can do that. To me, it doesn't sound like she has a you can do this or do that option. If I'm understanding you correctly, you can't plat it because of the toad habitat, right? And then Fish and Wildlife.
You can't plat it through the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation Plan. She can't plat it, so she can't plat it and have the county approve it. She could plat it and get a Fish and Wildlife permit.
But Fish and Wildlife is saying that she doesn't need to do that. So she's kind of in a hard rock between a hard place.
We don't have any documentation about what Fish and Wildlife would require.
So would that be something that you could provide?
Can I comment?
Yes.
So, back to the beginning, if I was building Buc-ee's up there, I would go to Fish and Wildlife because I would have this huge coverage, I would have parking lots, I would have driveways, I would have all this stuff. Back up, if I was kissing an acre, I would go to the county, you know? But I'm nowhere close to that kind of coverage. So that $3,000, it's not about not following the rules. You have that third option of a declination, which I've done. And it's like, why don't I pay it? Because it's $3,000. I'm into this project probably $60,000, and I don't have utilities. And I'm talking about getting utilities 350 square foot building. I mean, it's just endless, the fees and the, I mean, there's just, I still don't know when I'm going to get utilities and when I'm going to be able to use my property. So it's just another fee. And so it's a guarantee. But now keeping this in mind too, for the last 5 years, I've participated in, and we've hired and spent several $1,000s between a group of us, and we've hired a toad expert to do studies up there. Just because for ourselves, we wanted to know what we were dealing with, no toads. So that was, it's not like I don't care or I haven't done some sort of due diligence. We've done these studies for years. And again, I just think that this is just a little bit overreaching for the city to ask me to do this when I've got Carrie saying that I don't have to, and I'm not looking at going even close to an acre. If I was looking at going over an acre, that's when the Fish and Wildlife kick in. And I think the third option is really for somebody like me. I think that's what that option is for, someone who's really got minimal invasion in that area. So.
And that's kind of what I'm getting from these conversations. It's not that you wouldn't follow that process if it was required. You sound like you certainly would. But you're in this middle space here to where you kind of don't have to. So why are we forcing you to, is what I'm hearing you say. So I would be inclined to say that if she's willing to do the declination, and there is no requirement that she's infringing upon, then why are we?
Well, the declination says I'm not going to follow the county's rules. It's not saying I'm within their rules and I'm following the rules. It says I'm not going to follow the rules. That's what the declination of coverage says. Is I'm not following those.
That's what the wording means, right? But based on what I'm hearing, she kind of is within the rules because
and if Carrie will give us a letter that says that she's following the Lost Pines Habitat Conservation rules and she does not need a permit, then we would accept, and she still can't plat, but we will need that in writing from the county.
And that'll fix this, right?
that,
Yeah.
to me,
Okay.
would resolve that issue. Then on the sidewalk situation, is there a requirement on how that sidewalk is built out? Does it have to be concrete, or can
It'll
we-
have to meet ADA rules, to Texas Department of Licensing Registration, the accessibility rules. So it can be made out of other materials. It'll just have to meet accessibility.
I think that would resolve that issue.
And that's a federal requirement.
It's a state requirement. So the Texas Department of Licensing and Registration oversees the Texas accessibility standards. In this case, ADA actually is regulated at the state level in the state of Texas.
Okay.
Would that apply for the parking lot as well?
It would apply to certain aspects of the site plan, yes. All site plans over a certain value, over $50,000, construction over $50,000 has to be registered and reviewed by the state. But the state does that. So.
And then my final question is, why was that sidewalk requirement not a requirement for the adjoining property that she's
The
referring to?
adjoining property that we're talking about is the city's property that has our water towers on it. That's where the city water tower is. And it was a landscaping project that TxDOT's been doing. Usually when they install new facilities, they will put in new sidewalks. Nothing over here had been a new facility, so they didn't put in any sidewalks. Nothing triggered sidewalks. There was no development that triggered sidewalks. But the city does own the property to the east, and that is something we can look at, connecting those sidewalks back to the state park, because we control that property.
I've got a question, it's kind of a maintenance question. In general, anything that's less impervious cover to me, less the better. But to put in public sidewalks that are crushed granite and then require the city to maintain them might create more challenges for the city to maintain them than putting in a paved sidewalk that once it's in, it should be good for, a couple decades.
And that's something we'd have to review at the site development plan phase.
So I would be inclined to approve this plan and authorize staff to work with the applicant and TxDOT to come up with a solution for the sidewalks that worked with city budget and maintenance and, connectivity that would meet all of those. Because it also wouldn't make sense to require somebody next door to put in hard sidewalk, and then you get to this property and it's gravel, and then you get to the next, the city goes and puts in sidewalks, and then you've got concrete.
Yes, yeah, and that's something that we're basically, at this stage, not waiving the sidewalk requirement, and that's something that sometimes when these phases, we can't really make harder determinations until we get to the site development plan.
So if I can address that real quick. So that's why I was saying that I wanted to do the sidewalk inside the fence. So it's on my property, I'm maintaining it, and then there's an attachment to the property with that requirement is connectivity. You see? So I don't want to do anything on the city side at this point, because there's nothing to connect to.
Would she still have to adhere to the ADA rules if she does the sidewalk inside her property?
To meet the goals of being, of a city sidewalk, it would still have to have what we call an access easement over it, so the public could walk across it.
Okay.
And then that would give us, it would still be on private property, but it'd give the city the ability to maintain it if we needed to.
But and I really feel like that this letter that Carrie wrote, which was specific to the permit, and if you read that, it's the very last page. I'm not going to read it, but to you, because you can read it. But I really ask that you go ahead and approve the plan instead of making me come back at another hearing or whatever, but maybe Carrie needs to make it more clear that I've chosen that third, even though the city has that letter, but that the city not force me to pay that fee. And again, it's not about non-compliance for me, it's just about coverage and me not, and honestly, at any time, the county can walk over there and so can Fish and Wildlife. And if I've gone in there and put a bunch of buildings, they can fine me. That's not what I'm going to do. That's why I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about doing anything that's going to trigger any retribution from the county or the toad habitat or Fish and Wildlife.
How many permanent structures do you plan on having on the property? I know you said you're going to have food trailers and...
There's one that we're going to put on there, yeah.
Okay.
My only concern with any of this is the sidewalk issue and having a public sidewalk, even with an access easement on private property, and then wanting the city to maintain that. That seems problematic. There's liability concerns with that, even with an easement.
I don't want the city to maintain it. I don't understand. If I have a sidewalk on my property, I'm maintaining it.
The issue with, to meet the goals, if it's on private property and there's no access easement on it, then the public can't walk on it. It is still considered private property and can be gated off. So that's, the goal of a public sidewalk is that the public can walk on it. So that's why if a sidewalk is on private property that's meeting that requirement, that it has to have an access easement onto it.
And so when sidewalks are required for public good, and the applicant has to incorporate those into their design plans and the city maintains it, I understand that they pay to install it. Does the city install the sidewalks or they install it with their building plans and the city inspects it?
The developer installs, we inspect, and then we take over the sidewalk that is either in the public right-of-way or if it's in an access easement. That's typically the process. There are some sites in town that their sidewalks, the Burleson Crossing, due to kind of the way they design their sidewalk, if you ever see it, meanders. So there's an easement over that because it goes into the city right-of-way and back out and goes along. So we have an access easement on that, but the city does maintain that sidewalk.
And is that sidewalk crushed granite or is it?
It's a concrete sidewalk.
Concrete, okay.
It's just around a shopping center. So.
If I remember correctly, right, there's a potential chance for a sidewalk to go around the whole block, or?
Yes, so right now, I will say there's limited, I don't know if there's any sidewalk, but we do have plans going down. Let me find my bigger map. There we go. Well, that didn't help me a whole lot. Arena connects into American Legion Drive right here. Actually, when you get right over into this corner, that's where the county is planning to put their emergency shelter / extension kind of recreation building. The plans for that do call for a sidewalk there and a concrete sidewalk. So they will be installing when they build that. And they have approved plans on that.
Does the city have any plans of running up 21?
Not yet,
Okay.
no.
That would be a lot of work right
It
there.
would be a lot of work, and those are plans that as more development comes to this area and places start to fill in, then we will be looking closer at filling in those areas.
Okay, so they would just pretty much be building a dead end right there.
At this point in time, yes.
Wasn't there a conversation at one time, though, about adding sidewalks for connectivity up?
There was a grant that the city had received to extend a trail sidewalk along Loop 150 Chestnut, and the city wasn't interested in pursuing it and didn't pursue the rest of the grant. So
Is that when the TxDOT shut it down because they didn't want?
TxDOT didn't shut it down. It was that I think the plans got complicated on creating the pedestrian crossing over 95. But it wasn't shut down by TxDOT. There were different options. It was just, I think, city priorities changed during that project.
And there was an ADA compliance issue also going up that hill. So there were a lot of things that entered into that. I think you were on the council back then, weren't you?
My last question, I almost forgot what it was. Are there any sidewalks existing in the city that are not concrete that would be similar to?
Not to my knowledge, no.
So I just wanted to say two things if I could. So we did, on council, approve alternative surfaces for that part of the city. So it's very possible that there could be some sort of a granite surface that went all the way from 95 once all that development occurs and around. But just like Jennifer said, when you asked her, does the city have any plans? Like on their property, there's no sidewalks there. And she's like, well, we're going to do that when it makes sense. Well, that's all I'm asking. Attach that requirement to the property and let's do it when it makes sense. But it doesn't make sense right now because it doesn't go anywhere.
And one of the options that we do have is that the property owners can provide fiscal guarantee or escrow money that we keep in an account to build the sidewalk. So that's an option to do that, so.
So I just want to say this. I would like to say that if the city chooses to put a sidewalk that goes somewhere on the west side, I'm happy to put a sidewalk that connects to that, you know, from that driveway. I don't think it's right for the city. I mean, I'm so invested in this project, and, you know, and I think that you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about getting these huge permit fees for like Buc-ee's and these huge developments. I am an individual trying to put some trailers on a property and open a 350 square foot building. You know, it's just, and that's been the complication. The same rules are not applying. I'm not doing a huge development. I don't have a staff of attorneys. You know, I'm just trying to have a little fun up there on the hill and do something kind of cute that's going to fit in with the rodeo and what's up there, so.
Are you going to speak? Are we ready for a motion?
I'm ready to make a motion if there are no other questions.
Anyone have any questions? Okay.
So I make a motion to approve item 3D contingent upon the developer working with the city and TxDOT to develop an agreeable sidewalk plan and remove the permit and plating requirement contingent upon a letter from Fish and Wildlife.
The county. 'Cause
The county.
Fish and Wildlife is going to
county's
require a
different,
permit.
yeah.
The county that says that, so what our concern is that it either needs to follow the county's plan or it needs to follow Fish and Wildlife's.
Okay.
And if we get something stating that it's following the county's,
Contingent upon a letter from the county
There you go.
indicating the permit isn't required.
yes.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Shirley,
Yes.
Carrie Kaler,
Yes.
Debbie Moore,
Yes.
Cynthia Meyer,
Yes?
Ishmael Harris.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. So there's some more work to do. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 4, updates. Item 4A, discussion on dates for upcoming Planning and Zoning Commission Bastrop Building Block B3 Code Workshop.
Yes, so at the last meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission requested to do, we have different titles, but kind of a Planning and Zoning 101 workshop, and we're getting dates. These are 3 dates that would work with our calendar. So March 10th and 17th would be additional meetings for the commission. March 31st is our regular meeting date. So the question is, do you want to do that as a separate workshop? We could sit down at the tables and be a little bit more informal, still record it, you know, but have that be a workshop that's our only dedicated topic for the evening, or would you like to do it as part of your March 31st meeting?
I think to go into that and the depth that I would consider, I think we need to have it as the only item on our workshop. And we've had workshops back there on the table, and it really does bring out more, it's easier to talk and exchange ideas back there. So I think unless the commission is not in agreement with that, I'd like to have it as the only item on.
Okay, so we can look at the March 10th or 17th, and we can send out an email to poll those 2 dates on when we can get the majority of the members there.
I can tell you right now, 10th won't work for me, but 17th probably will.
17th will work for me, too. Let's keep our fingers crossed on the 17th,
I think
and we'll.
that's spring break, but it might work. It might work for me.
You ain't no kid, you know not. But you got 3. You may want a break. That's right. Okay, so we'll aim for the 17th, but we'll see what the other members say. Thank y'all. Item 4B update on recent city council actions regarding planning department items.
Yes, so since the last meeting, the only item that's moved forward from the Planning and Zoning Commission was the Bastrop, Colorado Bend, otherwise known as the movie studio project, move forward. Along with the 3 items that P&Z considered, that we also had 2 annexations. One was for the Colorado River, so we can get to the property, and then the other was for the property itself. The applicant asked to postpone action on the items while they work out some other details about understanding the requirements of the development agreement a little closer. And again, this was for the first 312 acres out of the full 546 acres is what we're talking about. So council held the public hearing and heard the items for the transportation master plan, the future land use plan amendments, and the zoning concept scheme. It didn't take action. So those will still take 2 more meetings for those items to get approved.
Anything else? That's it.
That's it on that one.
Okay, item 4C, Building and Planning Department Monthly Projects Volume Report.
So this is our January monthly permit and application totals. For January, we slowed down a little bit actually on the new single-family residential. We only had 4. However, we did have 114 trade permits, which those correspond to single-family homes. For every project, you have to pull about 4 trade permits. So
Your plumbers and
yeah, your plumber, your
electrician.
electrician, your HVAC, or I guess 3. Have to, and irrigation, if you have irrigation, that they usually have to pull a permit as well. So those follow. For the planning side, we've stayed fairly steady. We had 34 applications, which has been about our monthly total of things we're reviewing. Another thing we've provided for you, this is out of the quarterly update that we provide to City Council. So this was our first quarter statistics. So this is October, November, and December of 2021. And we're comparing, of course, FY21 versus FY22, because we're always a year ahead at the end of the quarter. So we're comparing last year to this year. So the first quarter last year, we did 76 new home construction. We did 74. So we're pretty close to on par with the level of development we're seeing in town. And then a few less plats, but things are.
You're still busy.
We're still busy. There's a lot of, I call it the entitlement phase. So there's a lot of discussions going on with developers on property around Bastrop that how can we do a municipal utility district, or how can we do this development? So they don't have an application with us yet, or they've got a request to create a MUD in with us that don't necessarily, that one application can take a lot of time because it takes a lot, setting up the entitlements and setting up the permissions for a 500-acre development is kind of the biggest chunk, and then the plans after that take time on each one, but making sure you get the first step and the zoning right takes a lot more time sometimes than reviewing a site development plan. So we're still very busy. Everyone, I think, in the community, engineers, surveyors, builders, I think everyone's very busy. So
Yes, they are. Item 4D, individual requests from planning and zoning.
Can I ask a
Oh, I'm
question?
sorry.
That's okay. I just have a quick question about the application. So the permits. So when a permit comes in, this is the total number of permits that came in during the month of January. Does this number include, are permits rejected outright?
no, so that's where people ask, well, how many permits did you deny?
Right.
We never really truly deny a permit. Some planning applications do get denied because of the way the state law is written, but permitting applications don't ever really get denied because you turn them in, we review it, and we say, you know, if you've turned in all the plans that we need to review, we look at them and say, well, this doorway needs to be 3 inches wider. This window needs to be a little bigger, or you need a second window in the bedroom. And then we send out those comments and say, hey, you guys need to revise your plans to meet the code. And sometimes people just never come back. We send them their comments, and then they decide they don't want to build the house that way, or they've changed their mind, they don't want to move forward. So that permit just kind of sits in the system until it times itself out, or they withdraw it.
And you're responding to them via MyGov or phone?
Via MyGov.
Or, so then in January, I'm sorry, let's say for February, then are those that are still hanging out there part of February's numbers too?
No, so we're reporting on here everything that's applied for in this month.
During that particular month?
So if we have one that was applied for on January 25th, and we're still working on it in February, it doesn't get counted into February's totals. So we may still be working on it. And that's where there's always been a little confusion. So one of the columns on this chart is how many were issued. And that was a question someone said, well, how many of those 74 got issued? Well, within the quarter, 60 of them got issued, because there's always the chance that at the last week of that quarter, someone comes and turns in 4 more permits. Well, we just got them, we haven't even reviewed them yet. So obviously they've been submitted, but we haven't even reviewed to approve or send out comments for them yet. So those 14 permits at the end of the quarter, at December 31st, we're still in review. So we were either waiting on the applicant to submit their second round, their revisions, or we just hadn't gotten the comments out to them yet because it hadn't gone through the full review cycle yet.
And what is the review cycle?
2 weeks. So our application day is on Monday for planning and permitting. We go through everything and make sure we have all the documents required to review on Tuesday. And then we put everything into review on Wednesday, and everyone's to have their comments done the following Friday.
Okay.
So that's the review cycle. There are times with our third-party reviewers on some commercial projects that are bigger commercial projects, the review may take 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the complexity. But a single-family house or a remodel takes 2 weeks. And that goes for planning cases as well, because the state requires a specific time frame that we have to meet. So we had to tighten up our process, and that's why we now have a Monday submittal date. And that completeness check that happens on Tuesday, because we can't provide you adequate comments if you didn't give us all the sheets of the plans. We had one time where they accidentally merged the wrong documents, and we had page 1 of one plat and page 2 of a different plat. Well, we can't, there's no meaningful review is going to happen on that, because the first comment is going to be, we need the correct thing. So we send those back and say, hey, can you please correct this before we start review? Because we don't want to take 2 weeks to review it just to tell them they have the wrong documents.
Yeah, I was going to make another comment, but I think sometimes things people have to take the initiative themselves. The comment I was going to make was, if you have a citizen that's not familiar or comfortable with MyGov or getting on the internet or don't know how to follow up, then they may never know why their permit is sitting there, because they don't know how to add it. But then, as I thought of it, we got to sometimes take the initiative ourselves to pick up a phone and call or email in those situations as well. But outside of MyGov, there is no notifier to them that.
On occasion, our permit tech will go through the list and go through things that have been sitting out there a while. So if she goes through and runs that report and sees that something's been hanging out for a month, she'll a lot of times email or call up the client to see what's going on. We did have one guy that, the permit gets issued through the system, and he came in and was like, I need my permit. I need to get started. And we're like, well, we issued it 2 weeks ago. And then he looked at his phone. He's like, oh, I missed that email. So sometimes that does it, but he did come in. So he came in, he found out, and then he was able to get started the next day. So.
Good comments, thank you. Item 4D, individual requests from Planning and Zoning commissioners that particular items be listed on future agendas.
I don't have anything, but I just want to commend the council for the pay increases to the treatment plant operators. Being in that field, I think that's a great thing. It's much needed, and I hope that they look at other departments as well. With as many housing developments as we're approving around here, we're going to need as many people that we can get. And we need to take care of them. So thank you for starting with that, council, and hopefully they move on to public works and parks also. So
cool. And that concludes our business here tonight, but I would be remiss if we did not congratulate our commissioner, Ms. Cheryl Lee, for being elected to the Bastrop City Council. But it comes as bittersweet. I think she's going to be a terrific member. But after she's sworn in, she's not going to be a P&Z member. So, thank you and congratulations.
Congratulations, Cheryl.
Thank you. It's been, so when I first met Connie 5 years ago, I was thinking of running for city council 5 years ago, but, because I did a lot of legislative stuff in Austin, but not much here in Bastrop. And we talked about me starting and planning and zoning so that I can kind of learn the ropes and get acclimated to what I might be faced with if I were a council member. So I think that that discussion with her was the best move. I have really enjoyed working with all of you guys and sitting up here and listening. I love listening to citizen comments. I love when people come in to make citizen comments because it helps us with our decision. And it helps us to look at all aspects of that situation based on what we just have on paper. So I have one more meeting with y'all for sure next month. April, I think our meeting falls on my birthday week, and I'll be traveling. But if it doesn't, I will be here. No, I'll be traveling. I'll be traveling that whole next week. So March may be my last meeting with y'all. But I thoroughly enjoy all of you and hope. And I'm looking forward to continue working with you because we'll still be in the same realm.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
And good luck. Item 5,
Make a motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second. We're out of here. Thank you.